What's up, everybody? Welcome back in. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Rob Ellis along with Derek Gunn and Barrett Brooks. Excited to talk to our next guest. It's been a minute since I had any conversations with him back when he was covering the Birds. He now does an excellent job covering the Carolina Panthers. He is the beat reporter for the Charlotte Observer. You could follow him on Twitter at Mike_E_Kaye. Mike K, what's going on, Mike?
Well, thank you for efforting through the worst Twitter handle in the history of Twitter. I really appreciate
I'm actually done for the rest of the show, Mike. Thanks.
Yeah,
Take care.
you filled your quota. You did everything you needed to do. It's good to see you guys. I haven't seen you in a while. But
I know, Mike. How's it going? You down there in sunny weather, man,
that
living it up.
screened-in porch is looking killer, man.
Right,
I'm liking
right.
that.
Listen, that's why I moved down here, so I could actually have a house. You know, I miss Jersey more than I miss pretty much anything in my life. But, you know, it's been cool out here. We were able to get a house and stuff's going well. I'm enjoying it down here, but obviously paying attention to what's going on up there. And boy, have you boys been busy.
Yeah, just a little bit, man.
Yeah, I want to dive into the Birds with you in a second because I know you still keep a very close eye out. But you've had a pretty busy offseason yourself, man. I mean, Frank Reich and Deuce and Miles Sanders, a lot of Philly ties. But let's start with the Frank Reich hiring and that process and just sort of where things are right now with Frank taking over as the head coach.
So I think a lot of the theme of this offseason for the Panthers has been, let's just see, right? And I think Frank Reich was initially that type of interview for the Panthers, but he blew them away. Like, honestly blew them away in the first interview. Second interview, once he started to talk about staff and going beyond just being a head coach, he really appealed to this team. He understands all the facets of an organization, having been a head coach before. He understands marketing. He understands what's going on in the front office. He understands contracts. He understands the entire picture. And I think when you have a situation like Matt Rule, where he didn't know what he didn't know, bringing in a guy who knows what he knows in Frank Reich was a huge solution for them. I think initially they wanted to take that Nick Sirianni route. They wanted to go with somebody younger. They wanted an up-and-comer. Shane Steichen, when I got here, was considered one of those guys who could be a potential hire here. And I think as they got through the process and seeing how Steve Wilkes coached up this team throughout the final 11 games of the season, I think David Tepper, the owner, really felt like having a guy who's just established gives you a much better floor than somebody who you just have to bet on being a projection.
Mike, early in the offseason, your owner talked about how all he wants to do is just win. He just wants to win and put a respectable product back in the field. When you look at the coaching moves they made and some of the players' moves they've made already, what has been the feedback so far generally in the area?
I think there's a lot of positivity. I mean, you know, by a lot of standards, Frank Reich is a boring hire, but when you hire the guys that he has hired, you know, Thomas Brown, who like Brian Johnson is going to be talked about amongst the future of the league's head coaches. You bring in Josh McCown, who's obviously sniffed some head coaching interest over the last couple of years, is well respected throughout the league. You keep a guy like James Campen, who outside of Jeff Stoutland is probably he's definitely in that top 3 conversation of offensive line coaches. You keep Chris Tabor, the special teams coach. Then you bring in a lot of veterans who have established themselves in their early to mid-30s, who can kind of set the culture. This team was missing a lot of leadership on offense, and I think that's what the fan base is buying into. This is a very nostalgic fan base, which you guys can definitely relate to, but in the way of they want the glory days of like the initial run of this franchise. And I think that comes with guys who have been around and done what they've done, and not guys who are going to change the culture or change the building rapidly.
Well, in saying that, then, you know, right now you just guys can't get right at the quarterback position. You think that Andy Dalton right now is the guy that can lead this team in that direction, you know, because I mean, back in that day, you didn't have like the big, it wasn't Cam Newton that really brought, you know, the team to a Super Bowl. The second Super Bowl they went to, the first Super Bowl they went to was just a guy, you know, but now, you know, Andy Dalton, he's taking hold of this team. Is he just a hold fast guy until they get their, you know, quarterback, or do you think that he's really somebody they're buying into?
He's a bridge. I mean, that's what he is. The quarterbacks they've taken or had in the past 3 years, I joke, are the bridge to terrible Bithia. Andy Dalton is a guy who we make a lot of points about Josh McCown and Frank Reich having these brilliant quarterback minds. Well, guess what, guys? Andy Dalton has thrown for 14,000 more yards than them combined. He's started significantly more games than them combined. He's thrown for significantly more touchdowns than them. He's a guy who started as a rookie, has been a franchise quarterback for 9 years in an NFL market. He is the guy who is going to be the peer-to-peer mentor for this first overall pick. And I think if you look at how Justin Fields jumped from year 1 to year 2, the jury is still out on him. When he was a rookie, Andy Dalton was his mentor, his bridge quarterback. And then you saw Andy Dalton leave, and Fields took what he learned from Dalton and kind of used that to be a professional at the second level. It's similar to having Chase Daniel with Carson Wentz, or a guy like Nick Foles with Carson Wentz early in his career. Those influences are huge in the development of these quarterbacks. Having those extra eyes in practice, having that extra arm in practice for you to get mental reps is really, really important for that position.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mike, then I got to ask you, and I know Frank Reich referenced this the other day, that, hey, I'm not afraid of the smaller guy, whatever, I guess trying to say, hey, everybody's on the table here. You don't make that trade. You don't give up what they gave up to get there, to not take a quarterback. In your estimation, who do you think it will be? Who will they pull the trigger on once draft night comes?
So they've done a very good job of muddying the water, but to me, from the beginning, CJ Stroud is the most prototypical Frank Reich quarterback you can have. He's got incredible ball placement. People talk about completion percentage and accuracy. Those are two completely separate things. This guy's got both. He's got a really good feel for the pocket. He's got good vision. The one real quirk with him is the first 7 or 8 games of this season, he played a game within a game called Beyond the Line of Scrimmage is Lava, and just refused to take off. And then we saw against Georgia, he has that instinct. He admitted at the combine he needed to run more. He checks a lot of boxes for what Frank Reich wants. I think Bryce Young has the higher ceiling. Same with Anthony Richardson, but I think when you've had the luck that they've had at quarterback, you want the guy who's going to have the best stationary floor and can learn on top of, what he has already established from an intangible standpoint. And to me, that's CJ Stroud.
Mike, there's rumors out there that Carolina, once they moved up and made this deal with Chicago to get the number 1 pick, that there's a possibility they may trade out of that one spot. Is that just rumor mill stuff? Is there some validity to it?
I think they are keeping their options open. They did give up a lot to move up there. Yeah. To me, the only way you do that is if you think that Houston's going to draft Bryce Young, you want CJ Stroud, and they're just trying to get ahead of you so that, Indianapolis doesn't try to sneak up and get him. Or if you're Houston, you think that they want Bryce Young and are willing to settle for second best with Stroud if you trade up. To me, I just think that that's kind of, that's the type of thinking. Scott Fitterer is a guy who should be considered on the hot seat after what happened with Matt Rule. We don't know all the moves that he was involved in, but you've got a new head coach there, and we've seen GMs get fired the year after a new head coach. This isn't like a Howie Roseman type of situation where Howie's biggest strength that we talk about, right, is knowing what everybody else is doing. To me, I think that this would be kind of an unnecessary risk for the Panthers to take.
Okay.
You bring up, I just, since you brought it up, I kind of sparked. I thought Matt Rule was going to be a really good NFL coach. It was not. It did not go well. You know that better than anybody. He's at Nebraska now. What happened there? Is it as simple as that he didn't have a quarterback, or does it go way deeper than that?
I think a lot of it stems from the quarterback, but I also think it stems from the way you treat your players. Not to say that Matt was terrible to his players, but I think talking college players is a lot different than talking to pro players. I think there were a lot of similar issues to what Chip Kelly went through in Philadelphia. In college, you really can be that authoritarian type of guy. And I think when you get to the pros, you have to know how to communicate to them. And I think that's one of Nick Sirianni's strengths, is he's able to relate. I think Doug Peterson was able to relate. I think the lack of NFL experience for Matt Rule was ultimately his downfall. I think if you scout a quarterback and you compare him to the college teams that you coached, I think that that's an issue. I think if you get into that bubble of, hey, I know what I know, that's an issue. And that's an issue that a lot of college coaches have.
Well, I just don't understand, how do you trade Christian McCaffrey at this point? And you still don't have a quarterback? I mean, I'm still dumbfounded that they let him out of the building. What necessarily happened to have him lead the organization.
So I'm going to come at you hard, Double B, because like when you're paying a running back $16 million a year and your offense is garbage because you can only rely on him, eventually you have to say to yourself, hey, this isn't working. We've got to move on. And the package they got for him was pretty spectacular. I mean, second, third, fourth round picks in this year's class. And then I believe it's a fifth round pick in next year's draft. So when you're looking at that type of package, this is a team that traded away a bunch of picks to get borderline starting quarterbacks. And then you trade a running back, which, you know, being in Philly, you know how those positions are valued.
Yes,
and by the way, you pick up Miles Sanders, who can do not as well as what CMC can do, but can do a lot of the things that he can. And then, by the way, you use one of the second round pick acquired in that trade to get yourself up to number one. I just like it's. I mean, they're basically sacrificing
everything.
You know. Well, but here's the thing, though. Like, if you said to yourself, like, to me, they relied way too heavily on Christian McCaffrey.
Yes.
You could see it. I was here for 2 weeks of the Matt Rule era. I was like, I've seen Christian McCaffrey touch the ball more than I've seen my wife in the last 2 weeks. I mean, like that's what it was. And then when you got into the first game of the Steve Wilkes era, where basically it was give the ball to Christian McCaffrey or nothing's going to happen, and it's still nothing happened. I mean, you kind of got to weigh that. And I think building around a running back is so rarely successful. I think Christian McCaffrey thrived in San Francisco because he had other talent around him. He had Brandon Ayuk. He had a quarterback who could get the ball out, even though he was the Mr. Irrelevant. Like, I think Christian McCaffrey is an incredible player, but he was not a great fit for a team that had no other weapons around him. You're basically running him into the ground for no purpose. It's not like if you said to yourself, so LaShawn McCoy is traded for Kiko Alonso, right? Mm-hmm. Which deal was better? The one that McCaffrey got traded for, or the one that LaShawn McCoy, who in my opinion was the best running back in the league at the time? Like that's, to me, like the running back position is so devalued.
Especially now, yeah.
Right. I mean, that's why they made the deal. Like, you can rationalize any trade. I mean, that trade to me is easy to rationalize, to be honest with you.
So, Mike, why do you think Steve Wilkes wasn't more seriously considered for the head coaching job? Because your owner, David Tepper, once, went back to the diversity thing immediately, and he had to come out and he talked about how we're the most diversified organization in the NFL in terms of front office people, strategically, African Americans, other ethnic pockets as well. Why do you think Wilkes? Because the team looked like it played better for him once Rule was deleted from the equation.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. When you have an interim head coach, those teams that typically thrive during that period, just from a change in voice, they typically do not turn around and stay successful. Mm-hmm. I also think there's a stigma with interim head coaches and defensive head coaches that plays into this, right? Steve is going to have to pitch a really good offensive coordinator, and on top of that, he's going to have to pitch a really good replacement for an offensive coordinator. That was the big thing in a lot of these head coaching interviews this offseason, is that, like, you better have an offensive coordinator, a successor to the offensive coordinator, a guy who can make French fries. You have to have a very well-rounded staff here. And I think the difference between Frank Reich and Steve Wilkes is Frank Reich had so much time after getting fired to talk to other people, that when you've got a guy like Josh McCown on board, that's a sexy hire. When you've got a guy like Thomas Brown who could be potentially added to the staff, Thomas Brown is an extremely impressive coach. And when we talk about minorities, he and Brian Johnson are going to be seen as those next two guys from a minority standpoint who should get offensive coordinator jobs. Oh, and then by the way, speaking of that, you hire Ejiro Evero, who was incredible in Denver, even with an offense that worked like a broken Thomas the Tank Engine. That's what I'm saying is they have made this a very diverse staff. I believe they're the only staff in the league with a black offensive coordinator and a black defensive coordinator at this point. That was very important to the organization, I believe. And then you look at the staff that they're building, and I just kind of think, like, it's hard to argue against that staff. Steve Wilkes is a tremendous leader, a guy I have an incredible amount of respect for, the way he handled himself, the way he took this team and just galvanize this locker room. I mean, again, he's a guy who was brutally honest. He has a phrase that he doesn't want a buddy, he wants a friend, because a friend will tell you the truth. And I think Steve's a guy who will be a head coach in the league again, and I hope he is, because now he goes to San Francisco, has a perfect situation. He is a remarkable leader of men, and I think he will get another shot.
All right, I got to ask you about Deuce. It would appear to be a lateral-ish move from Detroit to Carolina. We know he's got his mom is not far. Certainly, that could have played a huge role in this thing. Was that ultimately what it was? Did he want to just reunite with Frank? What was the reasoning for Deuce to make the move?
So it was a bit of both. I mean, he told us on the record that the reason why he came back here, or came back to the Carolinas, obviously his mother, as you brought up, but he really wanted to work with Frank again. They have developed a very, very close relationship. And I think when you look at the dynamics of their personality, I mean, you guys all covered Frank and Philly before I got here. They are very yin and yang here. Like, Frank is a guy who wants to be the good cop. He wants to be the nurturer. Deuce, if you get in his doghouse, you know you're staying in his doghouse. And
For a
he's
while,
a guy, for a while. He's a guy who calls it like he sees it. I think he has got the right amount of accountability boosters, to put it that way. Like, he is a guy who can set a tone, and I think you need kind of that enforcer on both sides of the ball. You need an enforcer on each thing on the staff. Evero is very similarly tempered to Frank Reich, but he's got Todd Wash, who I covered in Jacksonville, and that man will tell it like it is too. So I think this is a really well-rounded staff, and I think Deuce is a centerpiece. I agree, it's a lateral move, but comfort, right? Like we just talked about, I'm out here. So I think that he is a really good addition. I'm really interested to see if he can get Miles Sanders to improve his vision and his receiving ability out here.
Well, let me ask you this then. You're looking at the way they're constructed right now at this point. You're in a pretty bad division, man. Would you say that I think they're tit for tat with the Saints right now. Do you have them winning this division, or where do you have them in the division?
Tell me who they drafted first overall. And I mean, if we're talking about CJ Stroud and Andy Dalton starts the first 4 games of the season, sure. I mean, this thing is wide open. I mean, I covered Baker Mayfield, was not impressed. He's now the head quarterback of the Buccaneers. Kyle Trask didn't like him as a prospect. The Bucs are bleeding talented players on defense. The Saints, who will be in cap hell for the rest of Mickey Loomis's life. I mean, but they have an impressive starting group. They just have no depth. I think the Panthers and the Saints are 2 teams that you can look at and you could say, hey, this is going to be a battle. But then you're like, but they're still pretty bad. Like, there's a lot of work to be done here. Everybody keeps talking about how this Panthers defense nationally was a top 10 defense. They absolutely were not. They were, I think, ranked 18th throughout most of the year. They only slightly improved after the switch to Al Holcomb and Steve Wilkes. Although I will say that improvement was felt on the scoreboard. They were better offensively. There's a lot of work to be done here, guys. They're switching to a 3-4 from a 4-3. This is going to be kind of a rebuild on the fly.
Interesting. You muted, Derek.
What happens to Matt Corral if they stay and want to take a quarterback? I mean, it wasn't that long ago. They were talking about this young man. He has all this potential. He could be a starter. Bringing Andy Dalton as the buffer to whoever the heir apparent is. What happens to this kid?
So that's been a topic around here. So I shouldn't say who cares, but I think when you're
just did.
Yeah, you're saying it. You already know where you're going. Yeah.
Look, the kid had a Liz Frank injury all last year. There's a new regime here. Typically, when you draft quarterbacks and trade up for quarterbacks, even if it's in the 3rd round, you're doing it because the coaching staff wants the guy. I mean, he can battle. He can try to win the number 2 job from the rookie. It's probably not going to happen. I've been told that they are not actively shopping him. Whether he wants that or not, I'm not sure. But I think, look, you kind of, in the NFL, you kind of take what's given, right? There's only 32 starting jobs. There's 32 GM jobs. Like, it is what it is, and it's always a matter of ecosystem and situation. And I think, look, if he plays well in the preseason, maybe he gets the Ian Book treatment or the Kellen Munn treatment. He gets cut and lands on another squad, and maybe he can fight for that number 2 job. But right now, I mean, it's just a wait and see with him.
Mike, let's dig on the Eagles, man. I'm just curious. You let this offseason, it's been interesting. They lost both coordinators. They've lost some, big names, no doubt. Javon Hargrave, CJGJ being the latest here. How much of a hit do you think they've taken this offseason compared to what they were last year?
So I've been watching from afar, but I think something that should be talked about a lot more is the loss of TJ Edwards. That guy is extremely smart. He cleans up a lot of mistakes. And now I think they just signed Nicholas Morrow, who literally played over 1,000 snaps for that Bears defense. Talk about a miserable life. Oh my God. Being on the field for the 2022 Bears for every single play.
Combat pay. Yeah, combat pay.
Yeah, that's a tough beat. Look, they better pray that Nakobe Dean is as good as draft nicks and Eagles fans think he is, because to me, he's a better fit for weak side linebacker and couldn't get onto the field with a guy in TJ Edwards who's repeatedly proven people wrong, with Kaiser White, who was extremely inconsistent. Look, I think linebacker is going to be it's going to be a back to reality sort of. They really had a nice thing going last year, and that's going to be tough. CJGJ, look, I grew up in the Joe Banner, Andy Reid era. Like, I saw Brian Dawkins leave. It wasn't the end of the world outside of an emotional thing for fans, but look, he's a good player. I just think, like, I would much rather have 2 top 10 corners than a top 10 corner and a top 5 safety. I mean, I think the priority in this league now is cornerback play. And listen, I saw some really bad cornerback play when JC Horn went down this year, and it's rough, right? So, they've got to look. I mean, maybe Jalen Mills is a guy that they like as a comeback dude who can play 1 year and then you get out of it, because their cap situation's much better next year. Offensively, I think they're going to be fine. I don't really. I mean,
you didn't lose a ton, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Isaac's an understated loss. But,
it is. Yeah, it is.
But I think Jason Kelce coming back. I mean, I'm interested to see the Nebraska kid at right guard, because to me, his film did not project him as a guard. I mean, I think that's tough. But offensively, they're going to stir the drink. I still think they're a top 3 team in the NFC. Not that that's saying a whole lot.
Even with BJ there, even with Brian Johnson being the new coordinator?
I think Brian Johnson's going to be a really special play caller. I think that guy, I mean, if you watch what he did at Florida the 1 year that he was there, I mean, he technically came into the league with more literal play calling experience, or came into the Eagles with more literal play calling experience than Nick Sirianni. So look, I know that Jalen Hurts adores the guy. I think that relationship is going to be really important. But you have to make up for Brian not being the guy in his ear every single day. Alex Tenney's going to have that job now. And so it'll be interesting to see how that switches up. The Mariota signing is the most whatever signing you could possibly think of outside of the history there. But look, I think this is Jalen's team. I think he's shown that this is his team, and I think this offense is going to cook still.
Mm-hmm. You said you thought Eagles were one of the top 3 teams. I agree, but let me put you on the spot. Do you think, when you look at all the wheeling and dealing that's gone on this offseason, the Eagles are still the cream of the crop in the NFC, and everybody else is trying to catch up to them?
No, I think San Francisco is the best team in the NFC. I think when you look at the way they are constructed around the quarterback, they are a really talented team. And look, I'm sure they're also probably the sorest losers I've ever seen as well. So
Unbelievable.
They're ranking high in every single category. I do think losing the linebackers, I think losing CJ is going to be a big deal. But that said, it's a coin flip for me. I just think San Francisco is a very talented team. Kyle Shanahan is one of the best offensive minds in this league. He's got the most quarterback-friendly offense in the league outside of maybe Kansas City. And it's all going to really matter on how they replace D'Amico Ryans, right? Like from an effective standpoint, I think this coaching staff, both coaching staffs have some turbulence right now, and so it'll be interesting to see how they kind of jump out of it.
Wow, I just can't. I can't get on with them, man, just because, even from the beginning, the middle of last year, everybody's talking about 49ers, 49. I just can't get on that bandwagon, especially now, like you said, D'Amico Ryans is not there. And as they go forward, I just think that the Eagles, somebody said something to me, man, about the defense is now a luxury instead of, winning championships now. Offenses win championship. Andy Reid just wanted won a Super Bowl because of offense. Offense is king right now. I don't think at this point, his offense with the 49ers is better than the Eagles offense, especially with our quarterback, man.
No, I agree. If you said, hey, rank the offenses, I would say the Eagles have a better offense.
Oh, okay.
But if you're looking at Javon Hargrave, Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead.
You just had to stick the dagger in with starting off with Hargrave, didn't you?
I mean, that defensive front is ridiculous.
Yeah,
and look, I'm a believer in Steve Wilks. I think Steve Wilks is going to have them playing very, very well. So, and he replaces D'Amico. So we'll see. I think if you told me Philly was going to be in the Super Bowl again next year, I would totally say I buy that 100%. I just think it's those two teams and pretty much everyone else.
Right. Well said. Mike, listen, man, it was great catching up with you. We love the insights, not just on the Panthers, but the league, the Eagles, the whole nine, man. Keep up the great work. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And enjoy that Carolina barbecue, man. Enjoy that Carolina barbecue, bro.
Yeah, it's Mike Kaye from the Charlotte Observer. He's excellent, man. He was great when he was here, and he's doing an excellent job down there as well. All right, we'll step aside, guys. We'll step aside. We'll come back. We'll hit a bunch of different things, including a little Ben Simmons update, Nova Women, maybe a Dawn Staley question I have to pose to you guys. We didn't get into the Phillies or the Sixers either. We had so much fun in the earlier segment, so we'll do all of that when we return. That's Derek, that's Barrett, I'm Rob. We're Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Let's talk Razor technology and IT infrastructure environments are more complex and heterogeneous than ever before. Consequently, teams struggle to respond to pressing issues with the speed necessary to promote positive business results, and the data that powers predictive monitoring and automation is left unexploited. Razor Technology addresses this challenge with a holistic approach that connects every part of an organization's technology assets, enabling proactive and secure IT operations without sacrificing the agility that drives innovation. Razor Technology automates monitoring and management to bolster IT teams that are feeling stretched thin, and it improves auditing and reporting procedures so that actionable insights find their way to the leaders that need them most. Save time and money on your IT and cloud services and secure your organization with leading end-to-end infrastructure solutions by calling Razor Technology today at 866-797-3282, 866-797-3282, or visit them online at razor-tech.com. That's razor-tech.com.